From 1978 to 1985, Kenner Toy Company sold 300 million Star Wars action figures. Stacked head to toe, that's enough to circle the globe 4 times. I did the math. This is their story.
Carbon scoring here. Looks like you boys have seen a lot of action.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, your home for action figure history. There have been toy lines before, and there will be toy lines to come, but nothing was as big of a game changer as Kenner's Star Wars line. We're going to look at the history of this influential line of action figures, and we're going to go over every figure produced, and even some that weren't, including the ambitious plans Kenner had for the continuation of the line after the completion of the Star Wars movies. There's a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns in the story of this toy line. So grab your popcorn and let's go. George Lucas was a young filmmaker coming off his first success, American Graffiti, in 1973. His next project was even more ambitious, a space fantasy based on the adventure serials of his youth and influenced by the films of legendary Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa. He was rejected by every studio in Hollywood, until 20th Century Fox reluctantly agreed. But Lucas ended up sinking $500,000 of his own dollars into pre-production and accepted far less money up front than he could have demanded in order to maintain creative control and the rights to merchandising. It was a good bet. Lucas made so much money off the licensing of merchandise that he was able to finance Empire and Jedi off of the profits. And the biggest chunk of that came from the toys. Lucas famously offered the Mego Corporation the opportunity to produce Star Wars toys. They were riding high off the success of their world's greatest superheroes line. They passed, as did every other major toy company. Finally, tiny Kenner Toys in Cincinnati, Ohio took the bait. Most famous for their easy bake ovens, they had virtually zero experience in boys' action figures. Compounding the problem, they had signed the deal just 1 month before the film's release in May of 1977. They had to figure things out and fast. Action figures were typically 8 or 11 inches at the time, but Kenner knew vehicles and playsets were going to be vital to the line's success. Legend has it that during a design meeting, one Kenner designer, frustrated with the process, said, "Just make Luke Skywalker this big," holding his fingers slightly apart. A fellow designer quickly grabbed a ruler and measured the distance at 3 3/4 inches, thus setting the scale for the entire line. Getting the product to market, however, wouldn't prove so easy. With their late start, there was no way Kenner could get the toys on shelves for Christmas of 1977. So they made a bold move to sell an empty box. The early bird package wasn't completely empty. It had some stickers, a diorama, a Star Wars membership card, and a certificate to be one of the very first kids to own action figures of Luke, Leia, Chewie, and R2. They were quickly joined by 8 additional figures, and the original 12 Star Wars action figures were ready to go in early 1978. These original 12 figures included R2-D2, Chewbacca, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader, Han Solo, C-3PO, Stormtrooper, Death Squad Commander, Jawa, and a Tusken Raider. R2 had a sticker around its entire body, and a vac metal dome that clicked as you turned his head. Chewie came with his bowcaster, and was one of the tallest figures in the line. Luke Skywalker came in both blonde and brown-haired variants, and the very earliest figures had a double telescoping lightsaber. Here are examples of blonde Luke, brown-haired Luke, and in the foreground, a double telescoping Luke. With the double telescoping version, the thicker part of the lightsaber slid out from the wrist, and then an additional lengthy tip extended from there. Due to the cost of manufacturing the separate parts, this was quickly discontinued, and the fragility of that final tip makes finding a mint version almost impossible. Leia had her vinyl cape, and the tiny little laser pistol that almost all of us lost instantaneously. The earliest versions of Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi also came with a double telescoping blue lightsaber. As did the nightmarish Darth Vader. I always loved how this figure towered over my Luke Skywalker. You gotta realize, for those of us who watched Star Wars as kids, we knew nothing about Darth Vader, No backstory, no redemption, just this evil character. Costume designer John Molo fused the shiny black headgear of the Nazis with a gas mask, motorcycle suit, and a monk's cloak he found in the Middle Ages department of a costume warehouse to give us one of the most enduring versions of evil in the history of film. Han Solo was produced with both a small and a larger scale head. This is the bigger one, which has a more accurate likeness. Solo was like a cowboy from an old western. He even dressed like one. But he also gave us the rational voice we could relate to in a movie filled with wizards with laser sticks. And here's old Goldenrod, everybody's favorite protocol droid, C-3PO. The really lucky kids in my neighborhood had multiple Stormtrooper figures. And here is our first not Grand Moff Tarkin, the Death Squad Commander. The Jawa was first released with a vinyl cape, but Kenner was concerned that parents would be upset paying full price for a figure that was half the size, so they re-released it with a more luxurious cloth cape. He's in there somewhere. And finally, the Sand Person. His arms are sculpted so that he can hold his bantha stick over his head, just like in the movie. After the roaring success of the initial launch, 8 more figures were released, the first 4 of which were available in a Cantina playset exclusive to Sears. Greedo, shot last, nuff said. Hammerhead, king of the alien side-eye. Walrus Man, 'cause, he looks like a walrus. And Snaggletooth. Apparently things were happening so fast, the Kenner designers only had one grainy black and white photo to go on while designing this figure. So they did their best. They gave him silver space boots and normal proportions. As soon as the movie came out, that version was scrapped for a more screen-accurate likeness, making the blue one of the more difficult to find figures in the entire line. Luke became the first character to get a second figure in the line with his X-Wing pilot suit. I was a full-grown adult before I realized that that is his visor and not his hair peeking down over his forehead. The power droid, or gonk droid, was really just good for one thing. Ha! Still works! Kenner could have cheaped out here like every other toy company and reused parts from C-3PO to make the Death Star droid. But they didn't. It's a whole new sculpt. Last and most assuredly least, R5-D4. How many kids you think opened up their birthday present from Aunt Joni and found this worthless hunk of plastic? And that is not at all based on a true story. There was one final figure that appeared on an original Star Wars movie card back, but the origins of this figure are the stuff of Star Wars legend. How do you follow up the biggest smash hit of all time? Well, by making the greatest sequel ever, of course. No, not The Godfather Part 2. We're here to talk about The Empire Strikes Back and the classic toys that it inspired. One of the best decisions Kenner made when producing Star Wars toys was that they continued to release the old figures to toy stores even as new figures and new movies came out. For example, Kenner only made one version of Darth Vader, but this figure was released with toy lines from all 3 movies. This let kids of different ages join the story at any point and still have a chance to collect them all. Speaking of collecting them all, one of the ways that we're able to best define the different eras of figures are based on the number of characters displayed on the back of the cards. Any kid from the 80s knows how crucial card backs were. They were part wish list, part checklist, and they were a staple of line after line of toys. The first Star Wars figures were on 12 back cards, with the second series on 20 backs. But one figure bridged the gap between the toys from Star Wars and those from The Empire Strikes Back. By Christmas of 1978, Star Wars was riding high and could do no wrong. Or could they? In an era before DVD players, widespread cable TV, or the internet, George Lucas wanted to keep Star Wars front and center in fans' minds. What better way than a made-for-TV special? It was an unmitigated failure, blindingly awful. But one good thing did come from it. The first appearance of Boba Fett. The January-February 1979 toy catalog was published in August of 1978 and contained a full-page ad for an upcoming mail-away figure. Advertising for this figure was quickly added to the card backs, blowing the minds of kids just like me everywhere. So while I was saving up my $3.09, tax included, to head over to TG&Y to buy the figures needed to procure those 4 proofs of purchase, Kenner had their own problems. They promised a rocket-firing figure and they meant to provide one. Here we can see some of the early painted prototypes, along with a wax mold of what would become the final sculpt. The first attempt at a firing mechanism is called the L-type, but it was rejected because the spring would fire at any moment. The J-type comes next, and was more secure. Thus far, there have been about 80 L-type and 19 J-type verified prototypes discovered. A couple of years back, collectors obtained a J-type prototype from a former Kenner employee. It included his baggie, 2 missiles, and the mailer box. Kenner was getting pretty close, but despite numerous claims to the contrary, no rocket-firing Fetts made it to kids' hands. In December of 1978, the Consumer Product Safety Commission noted 3 formal reports of children inhaling or swallowing toy missiles from Mattel's Battlestar Galactica line. Then 3 weeks later, a 4-year-old boy asphyxiated on a missile from a Cylon Raider toy. To show just how ubiquitous Star Wars was at the time, the coroner's report actually read, "Star Wars toy put into mouth, missile ejected into bronchial area." There would be no rocket-firing Boba Fett. But the toy we got turned out to be spectacular nonetheless. This is it, my childhood Boba Fett. It is the definition of cool. And the more played with he gets, the more screen accurate he looks. There were 2 kinds of kids in 1980. Those that had Boba Fett and those that wanted him. I checked the mail every day for months waiting for this to come in. So completely awesome. The Empire line proper started with another bounty hunter, Bosk. This lizard creature with the extra long arms and distinctive rifle was my second favorite bounty hunter. The Bespin security guard came as both a darker skinned and a lighter skinned version. The FX-7 medical droid is actually the most articulated vintage figure with all of those different robot arms. Next up comes Hoth Han. Yeah, his jacket may not be screen accurate, but this figure has something no other vintage figure had. A little loop on the belt that allowed him to hold his blaster. Why didn't they do this for almost every figure? Such a simple thing, but such an awesome play feature. Our third of the 6 bounty hunters is IG-88. He actually came with a blaster and a rifle. These dudes were spooky cool when you first saw them in the theater. The Hoth Stormtroopers. Who can forget the coolest cat in the galaxy? Lando came with that sweet Bespin blaster, a vinyl cape, and a smirk that says, "I'm up to something." Look, I've already professed my love for Boba Fett, but this is hands down my favorite Star Wars figure from my childhood. Bespin Luke. He came with a lightsaber that fit into his hand, not extending from his wrist, and his classic blaster. I used to keep those old green rubber bands that the newspaper came rolled up in around his waist so that I wouldn't lose the gun or saber. Luke was the hero of every battle on Batesville Road for years. Here's Bespin Leia with another tiny gun just begging to be lost. But dang, girl, check out your fashion sense with that robe. Army builders are always welcome, so here is the Hoth Rebel Soldier. And rounding out the first series of Empire figures is the Jedi Master Yoda. Yoda was blacked out on the initial card backs that were released before the movie came out, in an attempt to keep his appearance a surprise for moviegoers. He came with either a brown or orange snake and his cane, plus that impish grin from when he first meets Luke on Dagobah. The remainder of the figures from Empire would bring the total up to 48. Dengar was our 4th bounty hunter. What kid doesn't want to play with an overweight guy in bandages? I always thought Bespin Han was a huge upgrade over his original figure. His hair looked much more like Harrison Ford's in the movie, although it looks like it might be receding a bit on my figure. Lando's loyal sidekick Lobot had one of the more detailed facial sculpts of the entire line. Everybody needs a pig with a MacBook to run their carbon freezing chamber, so I present to you the Ugnaught. I always loved the design of the AT-AT driver. His helmet was cool, the tubes were cool, and his backpack front pack thing was cool. For a boys' toy line, we sure did get a bunch of Leia figures. And they weren't peg warmers either. Why would they be, when they look as good as this Hoth Leia? Hey, look who we found. Our next not Grand Moff Tarkin figure, the Imperial Commander. You know the Hoth Rebel Commander is in charge just by taking one look at that sweet mustache. Somebody's got to draw up a back-to-tank bath. May as well be the 2-1B medical droid. Again, I'm pretty sweet on this Luke Skywalker and Hoth gear. While Kenner never phoned in a sculpt on any of these characters, this one was particularly well done. From the flowing scarf, to the quilted patches on his jacket, to the numerous accessories like the goggles and binoculars, this is a particularly good action figure. Now, if only he'd come with a lightsaber to help him get away from that Wampa. Our second version of R2-D2 is my favorite. He comes with a sensor scope, which pops up like a periscope so that he can maneuver around the Dagobah swamp with ease. Guess who this guy is? Here's a hint. He continues to be not Grand Moff Tarkin. It's the AT-AT Commander. Okay, so I don't know what it takes to fly a cloud car, but apparently it requires some form of power drill and a space BlackBerry. Also, with that helmet, you know this cat's got a bowl cut underneath. I'm teasing, I really love the twin-pod cloud car pilot. C-3PO's second version came with removable limbs. Probably would have been easier if we just threw them away immediately, because I bet there wasn't a 3PO with all 4 limbs within 48 hours of any kid opening this package. Apparently you need another power drill and Johnny Cash's wardrobe to pilot a TIE fighter. Either way, I'm cool with it. As the final figures in the Empire Strikes Back line, Kenner sets a precedent that hardly any toy company has matched since. They gave us 4-LOM and Zuckuss, the 5th and 6th bounty hunters, to complete our set. How many of us are sitting around waiting for that last Avengers figure we need to complete our collection? These 6 characters use up about 30 seconds of screen time, but they comprise 12.5% of the total action figures produced to this point. That is a level of dedication to completeness that is shocking from a company that still hadn't made a Grand Moff Tarkin figure. 48 figures down, and we're only about halfway through the Kenner Vintage Star Wars collection. As kids, we had to wait 3 years between movies, but these days, we can jump right in. It was the final installment in the original Star Wars trilogy, and it was meant to wrap up the greatest fantasy epic of all time. And it mostly delivered. But Return of the Jedi became caught up in its own success and the marketing behemoth that it created. This is the story of the toys inspired by the film. Or is it the story of the film inspired by the toys? Jedi is as much the story of toys as it was the closing chapter of everyone's favorite fantasy space opera. George Lucas's marketing savvy allowed him to accumulate unimaginable wealth from licensed merchandise of the Star Wars films. He reinvested much of this into his special effects studio, Industrial Light and Magic, and was able to finance both Empire and Jedi independently. While this success granted him creative independence, the result turned him from a filmmaker into a one-man corporation. While Lucas wrote and directed Star Wars, he ceded creative control for Empire to director Irving Kershner and screenwriters Lawrence Kasdan and Lee Brackett. The result was a brilliant sequel, one that upended the narrative structure and ended with one hero frozen and left for dead, another coming off the betrayal of his allies, and a third having just had his hand sliced off by a monstrous madman who had just revealed himself to be his father. Great theater, but kind of dark for selling toys. Co-screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan intended for more of the same for Return of the Jedi. Han Solo was scheduled to heroically sacrifice his life in the first 20 minutes of the film, sending shockwaves through the audience that meant anything could happen in this final installment. Harrison Ford was on board with the plan, but as he relayed in a 2010 interview, quote, "George didn't think there was any future in dead Han toys." While I always believed the urban myth that it was meant to be full-grown Wookiees on the forest moon of Endor, the initial screenplay actually had a slithery band of reptiles on the moon instead. But Lucas got cold feet, and after checking with the focus groups, we ended up with the lovable teddy bears known as Ewoks. Fun fact, The term Ewok is never said in the movie. Even the name of the film was toned down from Revenge of the Jedi to the more commercially friendly Return. Everywhere you looked, it seemed like the merchandise was guiding the creative decisions. Then it went out and made $500 million, selling over 80 million tickets in the US alone. Maybe that Lucas guy was onto something. The Jedi line began much the same way the Empire and Star Wars lines did before it, with a mail-away. This time it was Admiral Akbar, and the price had gone up from 4 proofs of purchase to 6. I think it's interesting to note that in all of these early promotions, the title Revenge of the Jedi is prominently displayed. The figure itself is pretty fantastic, and the sculpting details really bring out the squid-like nature of the character. Next is the Rebel pilot Nien Nunb. Like several other pilot characters, he comes with the power drill weapon, but he has another really nicely detailed head sculpt. For me, the highlight of Return of the Jedi was the rescue of Han from Jabba's palace. Jedi takes place 1 year after the close of Empire, and it had to take the whole time to put together this heist. I really appreciate Kenner going the extra mile with the removable helmet for Lando here. You know you Jedi mind-tricked your Bib Fortuna figure all over your living room as a kid. Man, that dude is ugly. Stormtroopers are cool, Hoth Stormtroopers are cooler, but speeder bike troopers are the absolute best. I think it's the visor-goggles combo. I will buy any version of this character. Here comes our first teddy bear, Chief Chirpa. And straight out of the Boba Fett school of, just stand there and look cool, here's the Crimson Guard. The Gamorrean Guard certainly gave kids nightmares. He's like a pig meets Friar Tuck. Oh look, it's Rebel, not Grand Moff Tarkin. Seriously, how many old white guys could they make while still leaving out one of the main characters from the trilogy? Klaatu was one of Jabba's henchmen, and took his name from a 1950s sci-fi film. More on that later. I think this is Logray, the medicine man. They kinda all look the same. Okay, this one I know. Jedi Luke came with his blue lightsaber, his tunic, and a girly blaster. I always found it fascinating that as Luke traveled the path of the Jedi, his clothes went from white to beige to black. Shouldn't it have been the other way around? Leia as the bounty hunter Bosch is another stellar figure. Totally didn't see that one coming as a kid. Great plot twist. Time to do some army building on Endor with the Rebel Commando. I couldn't make this up if I tried. Ree-Yees here was responsible for taking care of Jabba's pet frog dog, Bubo. Seriously, that's canon. Squidhead may not have the most original name. Who you think gets made more fun of, him or Walrus Man? But that is an undeniably awesome action figure. Weequay isn't actually this guy's name. It's his species. Like if we just called you Earther. Every toy line has a few clunkers. 8D8 certainly fits this bill. For the record, we are about 60 figures into this line, and we have gotten 1 Chewbacca figure, and 1 Darth Vader figure, and now 2 Klaatu figures. This is his English patient outfit from where he fell in the Sarlacc pit. Fun fact, this version of Klaatu was played by Corey D. Williams, son of Lando himself, Billy D. Williams. Nikto is the second of 3 characters who took their names from the 1951 sci-fi film The Day the Earth Stood Still. The others are Barada, who won't appear until the Power of the Force line, and Klaatu, who has more action figures than Darth Vader. Although not officially carded figures, the Max Rebo band are too good not to include in this collection. On the left is Droopy McCool. Pretty sure that was a placeholder name that they never got around to replacing. On the right is the lead singer Cy Snoodles. Front and center is the man himself, Max Rebo, that blue snuffleupagus of a keyboardist. Switching gears entirely, next up is the Emperor. I don't even have a comment here. I'm just going to let the evil flow through you. White guy, not Grand Moff Tarkin, just the AT-ST driver who was soundly defeated by stuffed animals. Here's the B-Wing pilot. You can say all the bad words you want around him, because he's wearing earmuffs. Now this is an amazing action figure. We have come a long way in the likeness of Han Solo from his very first figure. And this camouflage trench coat made out of a canvas type material is really nice. I'm still partial to Bespin Han, but this is a dang good figure. Not to be outdone, Indoor Leia is equally nice. The removable helmet here is really key. Prune Face. No, really, they paid people to come up with these names. This guy was actually a spy for the Rebel Alliance. The Academy of Motion Pictures has to bear the eternal shame of not presenting the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor to the Rancor Keeper after his heartfelt emoting following the death of his beloved carnivorous murder pet. Ewok. I think this one's Tim Tebow. Wait, I know this one. This is Wicket W. Warwick. Did you know that Wicket made a cameo in Return of Skywalker? Yeah, me neither. Who cares? He's an Ewok. Little bit of controversy here with our final couple of teddy bears, Lumot and Paplu. These saw very limited release on Jedi cardbacks, so much so that many people include them only in the Power of the Force line, creating a final 17 figures to finish the Star Wars collection. After a fair amount of research, I realized that they did come out in 1984, at the tail end of the Jedi figures, so we're going to count them here and consider the Power of the Force figures the final 15 of the line. The Roman Empire. The Ming Dynasty. The 1920s Yankees. All good things must come to an end, and such was Kenner's Star Wars line of action figures. But after selling 300 million figures, they weren't going down without a fight. By 1985, Jedi had been out of theaters for 2 years. That's a long time for kids. New challengers for dominance in the toy aisles, like Transformers and G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, had captured the imagination of scores of children. With no new Star Wars movie on the horizon, Kenner was in a bind. In an attempt to revitalize the line, 15 new figures were released under the Power of the Force banner. These new creations, along with numerous previously released figures, came packed with a collector coin, a very cool but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to draw in new collectors. But that wasn't all. Kenner realized they still held the rights to the most successful toy line of all time, and they weren't going down without a fight. Kenner wanted to extend the line with original creations, a first pass at the expanded universe, so to speak. And thanks to collectors Lisa Stevens and Vic Wirtz, we have an actual copy of the presentation Kenner made to Lucasfilm. The concept revolved around a new villain, Atha Prime, who had harnessed the power of cloning technology and built an army of evil clone warriors. He was described as a genetics master, ruler of the Dark Worlds, and the architect of the Clone Wars. But Kenner understood that original creations alone wouldn't carry the line. They presented concept drawings for Luke Skywalker, wearing Jedi training armor and his covered cybernetic hand, as well as Han Solo, dressed as a heroic leader of the Republic, but still retaining his cowboy vibe. While the figures look cool, several amazing vehicles were to be included as well. This Millennium Falcon cargo handler would have been a sweet addition to the existing vehicle. It's similar to what ended up being the Millennium Falcon in the Solo film. This AT-IC, or all-terrain ion cannon, would have laid waste to scores of rebel troops. And there were concept drawings for new creations called the Annihilator, as well as one known as the Apex Invader. The cherry on top was the Imperial Outpost playset. This would have been Kenner's response to the mammoth USS Flag from Hasbro's G.I. Joe line. A toy this massive could only have been produced in the mid-1980s, the glory days of playsets that have sadly passed us by. And much like the existing Power of the Force line, they plan to include figures from the movie trilogy as well. There he is, listed right in the middle of the page. They were finally planning to make a figure of Grand Moff Tarkin. Lucasfilm liked what they heard, but ultimately said no. The 15 figures from Power of the Force would be the final Star Wars figures of the original line. Tradition matters, so like the previous lines based off the films, Power of the Force had to have a mail-away figure. So in the grand tradition of Boba Fett and Admiral Akbar, they chose the ghost of Anakin Skywalker? So it's not enough that they produce another old white guy that isn't Grand Moff Tarkin. They choose someone with 5 seconds of screen time. But the ultimate indignity is that stupid grin. Come on, man. Things got better quickly with the Amanaman figure. This bounty hunter was hanging out in Jabba's palace during the rescue of Han Solo. He is also a headhunter, as you can see by his staff. Man, I gotta get one of those. Next up comes Barada, the final of 3 figures whose name came from the 1951 sci-fi classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, along with Klaatu and Nikto. EV-99 is the only feminine droid made by Kenner. She worked as a supervisor in Jabba's palace, dismembering and tormenting other droids. Following Jabba's demise, however, she was deactivated, and later went into service as a bartender in Mos Eisley, where she made a cameo appearance in the Mandalorian series. I've given Kenner a ton of credit for never phoning in a sculpt, never taking the easy way out to mass produce numerous figures using the same parts. Until now. This A-Wing pilot is just a cheaply repainted B-Wing pilot figure, earmuffs included. Here is one we really needed, Han Solo in Carbonite. There was a Carbonite shell that was included with Boba Fett's Slave 1, but with this one, you can actually place the Han figure securely into the Carbonite block. Had the line continued, I would have loved to see more additions like this one. I can only imagine that this was the conversation in the Kenner design room back in 1985. You know what kids are really digging these days? No, man, what's that? Old white guys. Yeah, dude, old white guys make rad toys. Let's make an old white guy figure. Tubular, what about Tarkin, yo? No, too easy. We need to gleam the cube on this one. How about the Imperial Dignitary? He was in the film for about 3 seconds. Whoa, where's the beef? That dude is gnarly bodacious. I'm pretty sure it went exactly like that. Now this is a good toy. The Imperial Gunner. That red visor against the black outfit is the personification of bad guy. Luke shows up twice in the final 15 figures. First, in his indoor battle poncho. It's a well done figure, but it could have gone to the next level had it included a removable helmet like Leia's version had. This figure may be the best executed of the final 15, General Lando Calrissian. The head sculpt is an uncanny likeness for the time, and his cape is designed to fall at an angle in front of his left shoulder. Truly 4 inches of plastic goodness. Luke's back, this time in his stormtrooper disguise from the original Star Wars film. We would have to wait a decade to get a stormtrooper Han to go with him, and that came as a mail away for 2 proofs of purchase from Kellogg's cereal. The 90s were weird too. You didn't think George Lucas was going to let us get through this without an Ewok, did you? Well, we got 2. Warrock and Roomba. No, not the automated vacuum cleaner, but you bet your ass if Lucas thought he could merchandise that, he would. But one lovable character did get a well-deserved 3rd version. This R2-D2 came with a spring-loaded lightsaber that launched out of his head, just like when he sent it to Master Luke as they battled Jabba's minions over the Sarlacc pit. And for the first time, Luke gets a screen-accurate lightsaber with this green version. You know, R2's a pretty big smartass. Go back and listen to the translations of the beeps and boops that C-3PO provides, and you realize R2's got a mouth on him. Power of the Force didn't sell as well as Kenner had hoped. The kids had moved on. The difficult decision was made to discontinue the line. But they had just begun production on what would be the last of the original figures, Yak Face. Rumor had it that they destroyed their overstock of figures, while others maintained that the leftovers were shipped off to Europe and Canada. In any case, this Yak Face figure was never released in the US, making it one of the rarest and most sought-after figures produced. Well-preserved examples can easily go for thousands on eBay. With that, the original Kenner Star Wars line was complete. All told, it spawned over 100 unique figures over 7 years and defined the childhoods of a generation. Let us know in the comments if you liked the video, and hit subscribe so you can stay up to date for more goodness coming from Carbon Scoring.